What's going on, y'all? This is the Daily Destroyer, DFS show, Dynasty Warzone Network. This is the Week 9 slate on DraftKings, talking cash matchups. He is Lou, I am Tyler. As we always do, we will start at the quarterback position, talking through some of our favorite plays of the week. I think the big question we have here at the quarterback position, at least, is what do we do with Josh Allen? Is he in the lineup? Is he not? I think it's pretty obvious that Josh Allen is one of the better plays. We've probably played Josh Allen at least in 3 or 4 of the last weeks. It's tough to say. How are we handling Josh Allen this week?
Yeah, I think he is one of the main decision points because he is pricey, 8,500. It's pretty warranted. He's just putting up pretty much 30 fantasy points every week. They're facing the Jets. And I think one thing that's important to note this week is he does have a pretty big gap to the next guy. A lot of the big name quarterbacks that can match Josh Allen, the Lamar Jackson off the slate, and Patrick Mahomes off of the slate as well. You drop off to Kyler Murray, who's 1,100 less. It's not as big of a deal for you to go into the lower price range for QBs this week. There's a lot of decent plays there. So I think that's going to be the big decision point. You could drop down $2,000-$3,000 and save it elsewhere in your lineups. There's not a ton of crazy good values in other spots that we'll get to, but I think for that reason, I might end up going down at QB, but Allen is always a great play.
Yep. We like Josh Allen. He's a good play. Probably in the pool, to be frank, because it's just a safe play. But the way that I've been building my lineups this week, Lou, he just hasn't been able to fit his way in there. There's just other places I'm willing to pay up, and we'll definitely get to that later, especially at running back. It's a big question. But to stay on the quarterback side of things, it's just, the Jets' defense is good. Jets' run defense is 8th DVOA, 2nd yards allowed per carry. Their 8th DVOA pass defense, 5th, they're a top 10 defense. Jets are a top 10 defense. Is that going to stop Josh Allen? Probably not. Is it going to slow Josh Allen? Maybe a little bit. We see a 46-point total, which is pretty good for this slate, but I feel like it's pretty rare that we see a Bills total around that 46 range. So it does give me a little bit of pause, and I still have interest in Josh Allen, but I think there's just a couple other guys that scream value to me that I have a lot of interest in cash. That I'm going to, and one of those guys for me at least is going to be Justin Fields. It's crazy that we're talking about Justin Fields as a cash option here in Week 9, considering how the first half of the season went. But for me, it's pretty clear they're running Justin Fields more, so there's a bit of a floor there. The Miami defense is quite middling. I'm not really that impressed with what they've been able to show out there. Yeah, they've added a little bit of pieces here and there, but I'm still likely finding myself saying, the Dolphins, the way that the Bears have been playing. Not concerned. 46-point total in the Dolphins-Bears game, same as the Jets and Bills. So Justin Fields to me is a guy that I look at. He's turned it on for us, Lou. I mean, lately he's really figured it out in a way. I think it's really the coaches have figured it out and have been using him correctly. But I mean, he was able to get up 26 DK points against Dallas, 24 DK points against New England the last 2 weeks. Both those defenses much better than the Dolphins. So I just see this as quite the opportunity for Justin Fields to keep rolling. 20 to 25 points to me feels like a pretty damn good, kind of projection range for Fields. And at 53, that's quite the savings.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. His price, it has gone down. The last couple of weeks, it was 5,700. He had 24 points. Then he had 26 points last week, and now he's 5,300. And I think there's this. People remember the first few weeks when he didn't even throw 20 pass attempts in games.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I mean, it's still the low 20s. Like, he's not completing a ton of passes, but his rushing floor is essentially 50 yards right now. So you're probably getting at least 5 points from the ground, 5,300. If you hopefully he gets 200 yards passing, but let's say he only has 150 yards passing, it's under 6 points. You're starting with 11 points as a floor, and then you tack on touchdowns, whether he's running them or passing them. And he does have 4 passing touchdowns in the last 3 games here. So I do think he has one of the safer floors because of his rushing ability. I do think Geno Smith, people will probably remember what he did earlier in the season, but he hasn't really been doing all that great recently here. He hasn't gotten to the 20-point total in each of the past 3 weeks. So I think it's worth saving the 500 for me. You also have Aaron Rodgers facing the Lions, which
That was my
is,
next one.
I mean, play your guys against the Lions, but Aaron Rodgers hasn't been Aaron Rodgers this year. He hasn't gotten the 300-yard bonus yet. He does generally get low 200 yards, 2 touchdowns, but we know he doesn't have much rushing. He also hasn't hit 20 fantasy points yet this year. So I just think Fields' upside is potentially higher than those guys. Floor might be lower because he's not going to pass as much. But I think for the savings that you're getting, it's worth it for his range of outcomes and how he's been playing recently.
Agreed. I mean, I'm not playing Aaron Rodgers in cash, but I think if you're making some like tournament lineups, Aaron Rodgers is definitely
I
consideration.
think he'll be popular.
Yeah, be popular because it's the Lions. Like, if Aaron Rodgers disappointed through 8 weeks, I mean, this is the week he gets it right. It just makes sense. The narrative of destroying the Lions just fits with what Aaron Rodgers has done throughout his career. The other player that I do have some consideration, I'm probably not playing him, but it's just got to be Kyler Murray. It's 49 point total in the Hawks and Cards. We're going to get pieces of this game elsewhere, so probably not playing Kyler, but I think he's a guy that you could talk me into. I think that the jump down from Kyler to Josh Allen, like saving that $1,100 is pretty substantial for me, and I view that their base projections to me are about the same. So I have more. If I had to pick between Kyler or Josh Allen this week, I'd probably go Kyler. But I think for me, I'm really just locked on to Justin Fields. Any other quarterback thoughts here?
I think if it ends up being popular to be on Fields, one way that you can go about that game is you could potentially go with Tua stacks instead. Because the tough part with Fields is it's like, who do you stack him with? Do you stack him? Do you just play naked Fields? And that's more so in tournaments than cash. Like in cash, you're not going to be stacking him. You shouldn't be. But I think one guy who's somewhat interesting, if Fields ends up being like super chalky in his price range, would be Taylor Heineke, who probably has similar floor, not as high of a ceiling, but base level projections. And they're facing Minnesota. That game could get out of hand. Minnesota's been in some high scoring affairs. So Taylor Heineke is kind of interesting. He's coming out. He's played 2 games this season, 15 and 23 fantasy points. So I think reasonable for that price. And
I'm glad you brought
need
him
him to outscore Fields at that price.
I like that. I mean, I'm glad you brought him up because when I look at my
that game's interesting.
If I look at my points per dollar off of my projections, Heineke's at the top. He's at the top in terms of what I think his base projection is to how much his price is. So I'm not playing Heineke, but if somebody's like, "Hey Tyler, should I play Taylor Heineke in cash?" I don't think I'd necessarily talk them out of it. It's pretty much the same price as Fields, but I expect Fields to, have pretty not high enough ownership so I think it really matters, let's be frank. But I think Heineke, if he has a good game, there's not going to be many people rolling him out this week.
Yeah.
Pool of 3 quarterbacks, Lou.
I'm going to do Allen, Murray, and Fields.
Got to with Fields. Love it. All right, running backs. I think the question was, are we playing Josh Allen or not? That same question is really asked here. Are we playing Austin Eckler or not at 8,800? That's going to be one of the biggest decisions. I think I've made the decision that I am not playing Josh Allen, which says, yes, I am now playing Austin Eckler. Austin Eckler at 8,800 is in my lineup. One, they're playing the Atlanta Falcons. It's quite literally free points. When anybody plays the Falcons at this point in time, it's like there's going to be points scored. It's just the way it works. And then, it's a 49.5 point total, another pretty high total in this one. I think that the other piece of this is really how down the Chargers are on talent right now. No Mike Williams, no Keenan Allen. So it's like, who are they going to be working with? I mean, I think we talk about a condensed target tree, right? And we'll get to that at wide receiver. But, I mean, Eckler leaving this game with 8 or 10 targets and 15 carries, it just seems like a lock at this point in time, considering how much they're going to need to use him and will use him as the running back and one of their primary wide receivers now with Williams and Keenan Allen out. Anything to add on Eckler?
Yeah, I think he's probably just the best route play on the entire slate. Doesn't really matter what his price is. There's no other high-end running backs to pay for. The next highest running back is Dalvin Cook, who's under 8K. Jonathan Taylor is out, even though if he was playing, he just hasn't been the same Jonathan Taylor this year anyway.
Yeah, it's looking like a
So
lost season for JT, unfortunately.
yeah, and you don't have Chubb, you don't have Saquon, some of these other guys that have had the high floor, high ceiling combos, and have just been crushing it this year. You don't have a Kamara who had 40 points last week, so he's kind of just in his own tier this week for me.
Agreed.
Dalvin is having a perfectly fine season. I don't want to take anything away from what he's been doing. Like, he has been putting up a decent amount of fantasy points. I think he's like the 12th ranked running back for like points. So he's not doing anything too special. Like, if you play him, perfectly fine, but I don't think he's a cash play. I think Eckler is the cash play here. There's just so many injuries on the Chargers, and like, this guy's just, he's on pace for over 100 receptions, and yet he might have another 20 touchdowns this year. He's just basically every week he's getting multiple touchdowns. The stat is, in the past 4 weeks, he has eight total touchdowns. He had no touchdowns in the first 3 weeks, and he's had 8 since. And he's just constantly putting up fantasy points. Doesn't matter how many times he rushes, because last week he only had 9 attempts rushing. He had 36 fantasy points. So this guy could, like, without Keenan, mostly without Keenan, but also now without Mike Williams, like, I don't really see how Eckler gets less than like 6 receptions in this game. I feel like that might be even low for a floor. Like, he's probably getting 8+ receptions in this game. So to me, Eckler is just one of the first people that I'm trying to get into my lineups. A lot easier to fade him in tournaments, because plenty of other players out there can score 30 fantasy points, and you might be able to redistribute the salary elsewhere. So fading him in tournaments is fine, but I feel like in cash, he's almost a must play.
Let's move down the list a little bit, pricing highest to lowest. Obviously, look at Eckler. Doesn't look like we're in on Dalvin. Let's go to the next 4 just to get your thoughts and see if there's somebody there that sticks out to you. Aaron Jones, 74. Josh Jacobs, 73. Leonard Fournette, 66. And then let's throw in Joe Mixon at 65. Some of these guys got pretty good matchups. The prices really aren't all that bad, but do you see yourself going any of these directions with Jones, Aaron Jones, Josh Jacobs, Fournette, and Mixon?
Yeah, I think Aaron Jones was a guy who I thought is cash viable this week at 7,400.
The Lions narrative.
Facing the Lions, not a lot of, as I mentioned before, like, not a lot of the big name running backs on this slate that you're already choosing from with him. I think 400 less than Dalvin, I'm probably still going to choose Aaron Jones. AJ Dillon is there. We know this. Jones had 100 yards last week. He's done that 3 times this year. He hasn't been getting to the end zone as much as I was hoping he would. Also, not as many receptions. But going into the year, like, I was thinking he could have been their leading receiver this year on the Packers, just because of what their team is. But they're not. They kind of, I don't know. They kind of move slowly. That game could, if they slow it down, could not be as exciting as maybe we're hoping for facing the Lions. But Aaron Jones does it all. And we know when they're by the end zone, he is one of the first reads that Aaron Rodgers likes to go to. So I like Aaron Jones, 7,400. Mixon's okay. I think because of pricing at 6,500, he's reasonable, but he's just like way less exciting than some of these other lower end 6K running backs that we'll be talking about. The young guns that are out there. Mixon last year was getting like 20 carries a game. He's just not doing that anymore. Even last week without Jamar Chase, he only had 8 carries. Yes, they were trailing for most of the game, so he ended up with 7 receptions. So he does pretty much have 3 reception floor. Probably going to get 12 to 15 carries from him, but he hasn't looked all that great from just a raw like football stance. So I do like the younger guys, like the Stevensons and Walkers.
Let's talk about that range, because that's the range that I find myself going to. Like, because I'm paying up for Eckler, I'm avoiding the range we just talked about, and I have a lot of interest in that low 6K range. Etienne at
Oh,
63,
yeah.
Ramondre at 62, and Kenneth Walker at 62. I mean, these three dudes are bell cows. I
Yeah.
think there's. I mean, if Eckler is the best play in the slate, but I mean, if you wanted to play those three running backs, I would have no problem with it because I like all three of them. Especially if Damon Harris is questioned with a questionable with a illness. So if he were to miss, I think it would push me or Ramondre's way a bit more. But right now, I'm locking in my lineup with Eckler, Travis Etienne, just because he's got that workhorse role in a pretty good matchup. And then I end up going to Kenneth Walker, but I like Stevenson as well. Are you with me where you like all three of these guys? Do you lean one way or another?
I think for me, ETN's probably my number one in this range. Facing the Raiders, he's clearly their guy. I mean, they just traded away James Robinson, and he went from 14 carries to 24 carries. He's also getting work in the passing game, which for DK purposes, like that's also always a good ad. He hasn't been getting like a ton, but he's clearly the one who's going to get touchdowns if they're by the end zone. This game could end up being one of the higher scoring games on the slate. Part of that has to do with if the Raiders can.
Mm-hmm.
Raiders have just looked so bad and didn't even score last week. So if they can't keep up, but that's even more reason that ETN would just start carrying the ball more because they're in the lead. So I like the game flow idea for him. He's got that 100-yard bonus each of the last two games. This is like opposite of Vixen. He's a guy that he looks like a great runner out there. They're giving him the ball more often, and he's like a clear part of their offense. So I'd probably rank him being number one, and then if Harris is out, I'd say Stevenson. If Harris is in, I'd probably go with Walker before Stevenson.
Yep. I'm with you. I mean, I pretty much am playing Eckler and then two of these three guys we just talked about. I don't really have a lot of other to offer at RBs this week. It's Eckler because I'm not playing Allen, and two of these three guys. It's pretty simple. But I think if there's a couple other directions I could see people going. I just wanted to chat about those real quick to get your thoughts. It's going to be Donta Foreman at 6K and Deion Jackson at 52. I think they're both priced a little bit higher than what I would like. But I think both of these, Foreman's in a better matchup than Jackson. Jackson's in a tougher matchup. But, I just don't see myself needing to go down this low to get to Foreman or Jackson. I also, I think the talent of the guys of Etienne, the talent of Stevenson, the talent of Walker is much higher than Deion Jackson and Deonta Foreman. I mean, these are more backup quality guys, which doesn't usually matter too much at running back, but still the point stands. Your thoughts on Deion Jackson or Foreman? I'm probably not playing them, but I think they're at least worth talking about.
Yeah, I have a couple issues with Deion Jackson. Obviously, Hines is not there anymore. Taylor's not going to play, so he is essentially going to be the bell cow. And we know last time he was out, he had 10 receptions. First game he started, he had 4. So if it gets to that sort of game script, he could end up getting there just on the receptions at 5,200. It's not necessarily that hard for him to get there. He hasn't been that efficient of a runner, so that's been one issue. And as you mentioned, he has a tough matchup against the Patriots that have one of the better rush defenses in the league. So I think I might end up going there just for a price, but also only just in cash. I don't know if he has the upside that is warranted for me to go all the way down there. I probably won't play Foreman this week. I did play him last week in my main single entry team because of one thing that you mentioned earlier. Just play your guys against the Falcons right now.
Mm-hmm.
And he got 100-yard bonus, but also 3 touchdowns, which we weren't expecting that. But I don't know if I'm going to go there. He's just too close in price to those other guys that we mentioned before.
Agreed.
That I think I feel safer them than Panthers. That's last week was the most plays they've run all season by like 25.
Wow.
So I mean, they've just been so slow most of the season, and they're facing the Bengals. So I'm not sure how that game flow is going to be yet. I did want to ask you about Kenneth Walker real quick. So outside of his big runs, he hasn't been all that efficient of a runner, but he's on the Seahawks, so he's getting 20 touches a game. I kind of feel like he's not as efficient as Stevenson is. So I don't know. Do you think that Stevenson's workload with Harris could still be enough because he's been a little more efficient?
Yeah, I mean, it's just tough. It's more of like, I guess it's more of like the bias and me just like watching Kenneth Walker and seeing what he's capable of those long runs,
Yeah.
and like we're basically playing Kenneth Walker for the long run. Like it's like the
Yeah.
opposite of what you would think, right? Like I don't want a running back who's dependent upon long runs, who's not getting any pass volume. Like if you were to take their names out of the equation and say,
It's
Tyler, do
like
you
a
want to?
Chubb,
Yeah,
right?
it's like
Chubb
yeah.
had that for a bit where he would get there because he'd have that 150-yard touchdown every game.
And then Ramondre is getting it done because he's getting so much work in the pass game, and that's usually
Yeah.
what we want on DraftKings. So, like, I think you look at it objectively, and Ramondre Stevenson's a better play. I don't know if it's more of just like a gut thing or watching them play. I also have, like, I guess maybe the slight concern just about the game environment of the Pats and the Colts. I think, what is that, a 40-point total? Like, it's pretty pathetic at this point. I look at the other one, and I just, there's a whole like almost like a touchdown and a field goal, more points expected to be scored in the Hawks and the Cards, like 9 extra points. So I think that draws it to me as well. I was looking at some preliminary stats, and like Damian Harris was running a bunch of routes last week. He didn't get a lot of targets, but he was running a bunch of routes. So I guess for me, it's just like I like Ramondre. I think that at the end of the day, like if Damian Harris gets more work, all of a sudden it just wouldn't surprise me. So I think they're both good plays, but I just find myself leaning Walker's way just because I think it's a little sexier for me, in my opinion.
Yeah, I get that. I think the decision between those two is going to be a tough one for me this week because I'll probably end up playing only one of them, or could be a good segue into wide receivers. You could just play one of the wide receivers in that range instead.
Yeah. Seriously, let's do the pool real quick. Let's go 5 running backs just because I think that might challenge you a little bit more. Let's go pool of 5, Lou.
I'll do Eckler, Aaron Jones, Stevenson, Walker, and Etienne.
Love it. Wide receivers. Moving along. Again, we're missing some pretty big studs in this matchup. We know that. But at the top, we at least got to talk about Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, and Diggs. Actually, we're not really missing any studs. These are the freaking studs. Take that back. Let's throw Devontae Adams in there as well. 8K and up. Devontae Adams, 81. Stephon Diggs, 84. Tyreek Hill, 85. Justin Jefferson, 86. Cooper Kupp, 89. Thoughts on these top range plus 8K plus guys? You playing any of them? You fade any of them hard? Your thoughts?
I don't think I'll play them in cash. I think by playing Eckler, and if you end up playing Allen, like that's where you're going with your 8K players. I think the way that you can save is at wide receiver. Problem is, a lot of the guys in the 6K range have somewhat similar upside. They've shown that they can get 25, 30 fantasy points. So I think in the top range, Tyreek is probably going to be the most popular just from what he's been doing this year, on pace for over 2,000 yards. It's just kind of crazy. Every week he just sort of puts up big points, but I don't know. I think the Bears defense is good enough to somewhat slow him down this week. So that might be a guy that I end up fading. You kind of you don't feel excited about it, but you end up doing kind of thing. I think Justin Jefferson's probably my favorite in this range. Last week, somewhat infuriating, ended at 98 receiving yards, so he didn't get the bonus. But that would have been 4 straight games with at least 100 receiving yards. Like he's just Cousins is throwing at him. Like Cousins doesn't care about Am Thielen anymore. It's just Justin Jefferson now. And this matchup, as I mentioned earlier, like as I've been talking this through, like I don't know if all the time people are going to go to this Vikings Commanders game, but it's somewhat interesting. It's one of those games
the Vikings
that could
pop
be
off,
the highest. I could see that be the highest scoring game just because both of these defenses aren't all that great and have been in high scoring affairs.
Yep.
I think he's probably my favorite up here in this range. Diggs is just like gets there every week too. So probably Jefferson
I like that call up there, Lou, because I was looking at this game. I know the total is less than desirable at 43.5, but Commanders run D's second DVOA, right? The Commanders pass D's 28th DVOA and 28th yards allowed per pass. I mean, you throw the ball in the Commanders with great success. I think wide receivers are scoring the 5th most fantasy points against the Commanders this year. You know, I got Cousins ranked in my top 10. You know, Jefferson's obviously top 3. Thielen's top 30. So, like, there is a world where they just, like... And because of the game, I expect the Vikings to push the pace of the game and to try to, like, look deep early and often. So, I mean, I think, the Vikings offense is a pretty sneaky play that people aren't going to be going to, and J. Jeff could really pop. I mean, I would say that J. Jeff's in a slate-breaking spot for sure. And, you know, he's always kind of a slate breaker. He always has that upside, but I think people aren't looking at it enough because they're just looking at the matchup and perhaps the total.
Yeah, and AJ Brown kind of had similar last week, where a lot of people just weren't going to that game because they're like, oh, they're facing the Steelers, they're just going to win pretty handily. But then he goes out and gets over like 150 yards and 3 touchdowns, and you know, they have these upsides. It'll happen in matchups like this. The other guy up here that I wanted to touch on was DeAndre Hopkins. He's the cheapest of the bunch, but I mean, like in his 2 games, he has at least 10 receptions in each, over 100 yards each time. He's still under 8K. It's a good way to save some salary off of those other guys, where I don't really think him against the Seahawks is much different than any of those other guys above him. And we've seen Cardinals Seahawks. This could be one of the highest scoring games on the slate. I think we were kind of talking about that earlier with talking about Geno and Kyler at QB, but both sides of the ball, wide receivers, we're on here now. Lockett, Metcalf, Hopkins, a lot of ways that you can stack this game, and I think they're all in great spots.
Let's drop down a little bit. There's this range where I find myself. It's very similar to the running backs, right? We're very interested in the running backs in the 6K, low 6K range-ish. And that's exactly where I find myself looking at the wide receiver position. Amon-Ra St. Brown at 66, Tyler Lockett 61, Godwin 62. I am playing 2 of these 3 guys. Amon-Ra, Lockett, Godwin. 2 of these 3 guys are in my cash lineup. The volume's there. They're in good environment or they're in good environments. You know, I think Amon-Ra is just underpriced. They're paying for that injury, but I'm probably going Amon-Ra and Lockett right now. But I mean, I could pivot to Godwin. But you know, your thoughts on Amon-Ra 66, Lockett 61, Chris Godwin 62. This is just a great range, and all 3 of these guys are just great prices for what I think they can do.
Yeah, and I think just the way that the Bucks have been playing recently, and Rams have somewhat of a good enough defense that can control it. Godwin hasn't hit 100 yards yet, but he pretty much just gets you like 6 catches, 70 yards each week. So he's got a great floor. A little tougher matchup compared to the other 2. I already mentioned I like that Seahawks side of that game. I think DK looks fine. Like I don't think he's really beaten up, but they are the guys that Geno locks onto. It's either going to be Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf that he's throwing it to. They both have really good floors, and the low 6K wide receivers are all pretty juicy this week. I'll have pretty decent upside as well. So if you had the 300, would you go up to Metcalf over Lockett?
No, I would not. I'm not really thinking that's a direction I would go. So
yeah,
it's just I don't see much of a difference. He had that knee, injury 2 weeks ago. I mean, he looked like he was fine. He's off the injury report. I don't know if it's something I shouldn't be worried about, and I am, but I don't know. I just tend to always lean Lockett. I think that they're more of a coin toss than people think it is.
Yeah, and for Amon-Ra, it's just Hawkinson's gone. There's injuries.
49-point total.
Yeah,
he's going to play in the slot. He's going to avoid the stud corners. Like it's really easy to build a narrative for.
Yeah, he's going to get there. You're playing him for volume, and you're hoping maybe he gets a touchdown too. But you're really hoping that he has one of those spike weeks in volume. I mean, we even saw it last week. He had 10 targets. When he's healthy, he's the guy that's getting 10 plus targets. As you mentioned, because he plays playing in the slot has somewhat less upside than someone like a DK Metcalf does, but solid floor. Price has been going down for some reason. He seems like he's healthy now. He's the guy for the Lions, and this game could get a little out of hand if both teams are just keeping back and forth with each other.
And then Mike in the chat here says that DK Metcalf has had bad games against Arizona career-wise. Not something I noticed, but thanks for adding to the narrative here, Mike. Another reason to go lock it here. So quite simple. I think the other guy that we have to talk about, which is the other guy in my cash lineup, and that's going to be Josh Palmer. We know Mike Williams is out. We know Keenan Allen is out. There's not a lot behind Josh Palmer. He's been pretty solid. Like, he hasn't necessarily blown the top off, but we have seen him command good volume even when Mike Williams is out there. So we talked about this game, high total. We talked about wanting players against the Atlanta Falcons. I'm totally cool starting Eckler and Josh Palmer. In fact, I am. The 5,100 price for Josh Palmer just kind of jumps out. I think he's another guy that we're going to see in a lot of cash lineups, but rightfully so.
Yeah, that's just another version of this. With the injuries on the Chargers, they're going to consolidate where the ball's going. We've seen Josh Palmer have some decent games, some spiked target weeks, and heading into this year, he was the big name in best ball for this exact reason. If Mike Williams got hurt, if Keenan Allen got hurt, he would step into that role, step up. And last week, 9 receptions, 57 yards. In this week, I think we should expect more of the same.
Let's try to let's go to any other wide receivers out there, Lou? I mean, that
Yeah.
really does it for the wide receivers that I'm looking at.
Let's talk about the cheap ones, though, because I think if you go the build, Allen and Eckler, you kind of have to pick 2 cheap wide receivers. I think an interesting build. I don't know if I'll go Mooney, but 4,700 is somewhat intriguing. You kind of will need him to get a touchdown, I think, to beat out some of these other guys. But from a floor standpoint, pretty solid 4,700. He works well with Fields. He's probably the guy I would stack with Fields. That could allow you to get a Tyreek Waddle in your team as well. But the lower end of 4K is probably where I'd be looking. So there's Zay Jones. People are going to talk up Zay Jones, Khalif Raymond, and then Terrace Marshall is the other one.
Mm-hmm.
Terrace Marshall, that team, now they just kind of have to redistribute targets with McCaffrey gone. DJ Moore's gotten a lot of them. We haven't really talked about DJ Moore. His price hasn't gotten up too high, even after a big week last week. But Terrace Marshall had 9 targets last week, 87 yards. For 3,900, he's okay. Khalif Raymond, similar reasons as we were talking about with Amon-Ra. There's just less people for them to throw it to right now. And we've seen the upside of Khalif Raymond. He's 4K flat. Depends on how many lines you want to play into your lineup. But then the other one is Zay Jones, who
I like Zay.
We've seen him have some spike weeks in targets. What's your thoughts with Zay? Because I feel like his upside is somewhat limited. I think Khalif might have the most upside because I think he's the most likely to end up with a big touchdown. And the other ones are a little more of floor plays. But of those 3, which of them do you think is most likely to find your lineup?
Khalif Raymond, I think, it's tough for me to fit Raymond in there considering Amon-Ra St. Brown and where I'm likely going at tight end, spoiler alert. But it's probably Khalif Raymond. I think you mentioned it. I think even with not a lot of volume, we've seen, even if they're not long touchdowns, like 50, 70-yard plays out of Khalif Raymond. It's just the kind of player he is. And I just like the price. He's going to be out there running a ton of routes. There's no Hawkinson. We already mentioned that. Swift, if he plays, is still pretty banged up. They're not going to throw a ton of balls to Jamal Williams. It's just there's a lot of opportunity open with Josh Reynolds out for Khalif Raymond. So I'm probably going Khalif Raymond in this one. I don't think I'm going to play Terrace Marshall. I just can't bring myself to do it. I'm just not exactly sold on him. I think there's a lot of hype for him as a prospect last year, but he's pretty much just kind of face planted. And I'm just not going to end up putting my cash on a lineup that involves Terrace Marshall. I'm pretty neutral on the others.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. And I think in a vacuum, it's Khalif, but like you said, like it. If I played Khalif, I probably would. That
Go
would get
somewhere
me
else at
off
tight
of
end,
Amon-Ra
or go
or
somewhere
Tennant.
else at tight end. I think
Yeah.
you can. I think there's a world where you played Khalif and Amon-Ra and it'd be okay. I really
Yeah.
do. I
But
just
I
would
also
not.
think what we were just saying with that, with all these lines that are options, I also think that's why the Rogers stacks are going to be somewhat common, and the bringbacks are going to be common because they're a lot of cash plays. So that would probably keep me off of playing Rogers stacks this week.
Pool of 5 wide receivers. Lou.
Yeah, Amon-Ra, Hopkins, Palmer, Khalif Raymond, and Lockett.
Love it. Shifting to tight end, it's pretty gross this week, man. I think like there's no Kelsey, there's no Andrews. So what the hell do we have? I mean, freaking Zach Ertz at 5,100 is our highest priced tight end on the week. Not going there, but it's just to prove a point here. If I had to pick a couple, I think that I mean, let's just go with the spoiler. I talked about it. Brock Wright for the punt. The Zebra King, folks. Brock Wright in Detroit, 2,500. Stone Min. I think there's a couple targets there. He doesn't take a lot for him. We've seen a couple like decent plays out of him this season. That was with Hawk, but now Hawk is out. Looks like Brock Wright is going to play in this one. 2,500 is kind of where I want to go here. I mean, you're only looking for what? Like maybe he pulls in a touchdown. Maybe he gets like 50 yards, a couple catches. That's what you're looking for Brock Wright. I like putting him in there. No Khalif Raymond. I will play Brock Wright and Amon-Ra St. Brown together. If I am going Stone Min, it is Brock Wright. And there's not other... If I don't go Brock Wright, I'm going a decent amount up to play some guys. So your thoughts, Brock Wright, elsewhere?
Yeah, we've played Brock Wright on some Thanksgiving slates.
Absolutely.
And this just feels like one of those weeks where the top tight end is going to be some rando that just like caught a touchdown. And none of the tight ends are going to have more than like 15 fantasy points. And you can get away with getting 6 from your tight end. So I feel like just punting is probably the right play. He is 2,500. You could go. The thing is, it's really changes your defense. I think depending on where you're going to go up.
It does. It does. Defense and tight end are very much connected for me this week.
Yeah. Because I think going up from Brock to say Evan Ingram is 3,300. I don't think you're really changing all that much. Brock Wright probably has more likelihood of getting a touchdown. Evan Ingram has such a wide range of outcomes, but it's probably safer to get 3 to 5 receptions. It just might be for 20 yards. I think Kyle Pitts is pretty intriguing to me this week. He's not the highest priced.
And he's in that game that we like on the other side.
So I do kind of like a Pitts Eckler mini correlation. Pitt's probably the best raw tight end, just from a standpoint of like as an actual football player. The question is, will they get him the ball? Because that's always the thing with Pitts this year. I think Robert Tonyan, 3,800 is
I love
super
that blend.
interesting.
If you can get to it, it's a little more expensive than I wanted to. He's playing inline tight end. I mean, that's been a very big weak point for the Lions of defense. I mean, it's all a weak point for the Lions of defense, but I mean, he's in a spot to really eat. He's in one of those
targets.
Yeah, and I talked about this on my preview show, Crush the Competition JWB, is where, I think Aaron Rodgers has a good game, top 10 quarterback, top 12 quarterback, right? And how does he do it? Like, I just don't have a lot of faith in Dubes. I don't really have a lot of faith in Lazard. I just don't have a lot of faith. So it's like, how does he get it done against the Lions? And I think there's a narrative where I can, tell myself a story where it's like Tonyan has a big week against the Lions, right? So I'm here for Tonyan. I don't know. I'm not getting him in my cash lineups, but I definitely like him a lot.
Yeah, and I think he's one of the ways that you can get. And you can't even get that different in that game, but I think I'd rather play him than a Lazard for 6K. If Lazard is going to play this game, but it's more of the who you're facing him against, and the other tight ends on the slate are all pretty weak. I'm not excited and probably won't play Everett at 4,800.
Yep. There's other
So
pieces of that game.
I think it's worth the 500 to go up to Tunyon because he has a higher likelihood of touchdowns, which we haven't seen him have all that much
Yep.
this year. But I think in this matchup, I've been hurt by Everett Ingram pretty often.
Yeah. So Mike in the chat, Tunyon or Ingram?
Yeah.
I think Ingram is the right maybe play on paper here, but I think you're just about to jump into why I think you and I both prefer Tunyon over Ingram.
Yeah, I think Ingram's probably safer to get receptions and yards. Like he's probably safer to get you 8 points, but Tunyon is a lot more likely to find the end zone, has a bigger upside, could find the end zone multiple times. It's a really good matchup as well. But I think it's probably worth the 500 for me to go to Tunyon if I can find it. But I think I'd rather have Brock Wright 1,300 less than Tunyon. So maybe that's for me probably. I probably want to end up with Ingram. I don't like playing chalky Ingram.
Fair enough. Pool of 3 tight ends.
Wright, Tunyon, Pitts.
Love it. Love the Pitts call. Close it out on defense. I mean, it's just I've found a way to be able to get up to the Buccaneers against the Rams. I mean, the Rams are just like a pathetic offense at this point in time.
They don't score.
Yeah, they're just not good. Like it's like Cooper Kupp's like I was having this conversation, and I feel like earlier in the year, the Panthers when they were with Baker Mayfield, it was like, what do you do on fantasy with the Panthers? You start CMC and bench everyone else. That's how bad that offense was. That's where we are right now with the Rams offense. You start Cooper Kupp and bench everyone else. Maybe Higbee in a pinch, but you know what I'm saying? It's like there's nothing appealing about the Rams, the Super Bowl defending Rams than Cooper Kupp. It's a pretty sad state of affairs here. I think it shows the impact of the offensive line. To be honest, we can get to that another day. But I think Buccaneers at 3K, I'm able to afford it. That's where I am going. I've also think there's some interest in playing the Panthers versus the Bengals, but that's really where I'm at. I have the money to play the Bucs, and it's pretty clear cut for me.
Yeah, I think that's probably where I'm leaning right now. As we mentioned before, if you wanted to go a little higher at tight end, most likely it would be tight end. Then you could go down at defense. I think you could go all the way down to Panthers. Like if you want to save money on defense, I think just go all the way down to Panthers at 2,300. Probably won't play Jets at 2,000, but I bet there will be people that do that.
Yeah. And I think Colts at 27 are in play as well against Mac Jones and the Pats.
Yeah, the Colts have been a decent defense too. They get a few sacks a game, have had some turnovers in there, haven't been giving up a ton of points, and that's the stuff that we look at. I think besides that, you could go with like the Seahawks. Kyler is prone to getting sacked, and the Seahawks have 14 sacks in the last 3 games. So they're going to get to the QB. They've forced a fumble in all but 1 game this year. And that's a
good stat.
They also have 5 interceptions on the year. Like they're a decent defense from a fantasy standpoint, and I don't hate it. I think if there's 2 ways that you play that game, right? Either you play all the guys. If you're not playing anyone from that game, play the Seahawks defense. That's like an easy way to go about it in tournaments. I think from a cash standpoint, I think I'll do Buccaneers or Panthers personally, like either all the way down or in that mid range.
Lou, let's get out of here. Final thoughts. Week 9.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of fun ways that you can play this slate. Jaguars Raiders game, interesting one that could get out of hand. Vikings Commanders, like there's a lot of, as you mentioned earlier, we want to play a lot of these Chargers guys. We want to play a lot of these Lions guys. There's specific games that people are going to that opens up the door for some of these other games in tournaments. So probably don't play them play those chalky guys in tournaments, but chalk has been hitting a lot this season. So don't be afraid to just play someone because they look like a good raw play, because it's been working out. Maybe the projections are just getting better over time. None of these games are projected to be over 50 points. So you don't have to like force yourself into specific games this week.
Cool. All right, Lou, where can they find you on Twitter? Where can they find your work?
At lucky_ludog over at luckytrader.com. Do some other DraftKings for their Rainmakers portion of their DFS.
You can find me on Twitter at FFTylero. That's all we have today, folks. Don't forget, tell somebody you love them. Later.